All right, so with the Coyote going in, we are quadrupling the horsepower. We're gonna need a better rear axle as well. So picked up this Ford 9-inch along with a Dana 44 in the front, but just gonna need some love. So we're replacing this with a GearFX 411 with Eaton True Track in there, some Baer Brakes, and some paint. She's gonna be brand spanking new. Let's get into it. Here we go. Promised myself I wouldn't get too carried away with this build. Oh, this is so much better. So these are the colors that we went with. This thing has been super good to us and has done more than it ever intended to do. We probably put more miles on this thing in the last year than in the previous 20, 30 put together. Okay, so it's in there. Have you done a lot of bodywork welding?
Not too much.
We're gonna go with some Baer disc brakes. So we're ready for our pumpkin. For this one, we are going with GearFX's complete unit. And then the Bronco will be back from paint in a week or two. All right, so our Bronco. If you guys didn't know, last summer we brought home a 1984 Bronco, nice, clean, rust-free, a few dents and a few small issues, and we drove it home from Oregon back to all over the States and then home. We put 5,800 miles on it. So the 9-inch is an awesome axle in the fact that you can take the axles out with 4 bolts on the outside, the whole axle slides out, and then you can take your whole carrier assembly off with just the bolts in the front. Drag racers love these because if you grenade your center section, you break something, very quick to just slide the axles out, have a new carrier ready to go, pull it out, clean it, drop it back in again, 45 minutes later you're going down the track again. They're high pinion, which means that it's stronger. That means that when you're loading it up, it's actually pushing the pinion into the ring gear. We'll show you that later. What we need to know is whether it's a big bearing or a small bearing, early or late style, and we can do that by measuring these studs. I'm gonna pull this out anyway and just take a look at it, see what's going on inside. So I just ran a chaser over the threads. We can chop these off and get new studs, but there's nothing wrong with the studs. Just clean them, take the nuts off, and it should slide right out. There we go. A little bit of WD. And actually these sockets work really great. The Milwaukee with the square, because you can get the 6-point on there. I drilled the center out to 3/8 so the stud slides through, and then you can spin this off without stripping it. Smells like gear oil, so that's good. Due for a rebuild. Some pieces in there. A lot of pieces in there. So it either blew apart before, or we'll have some interesting stuff in the center section. Either way, we can pull the backing plates off. These are drum brakes. We're gonna go with some Baer disc brakes so we can actually stop. Don't forget that if you are upping the horsepower, it takes a lot more energy to stop you or slow you down too. So we've put bigger brakes on everything that we own, and Baer Brakes make a really nice kit for this. All different sizes to fit 15, 16, as small as 15-inch rims on there. We've got 16s, so we can go with a 12-inch. And the parking brake and everything is already in with that. So For the brakes, it's best to have the rotor centered on the hub, so he's got to measure that. I usually put the tape on the 1 and then measure, so that's 3 7/8 on the tape, which is actually 2 7/8 because we started on the 1. Keep in mind that when you're measuring, a lot of people don't know this, but this piece actually slides. That's so that if you hook on it, this piece slides to the end, and if you push on it, it slides to the inside, and that makes up the difference on this. So when you're measuring, start on 1 because that doesn't change, and we've got 2 7/8. That's important for the brakes. For the center housing, we need to measure the studs, the mounting studs. We've got 3.5 because we started on the 1, 4.5, so 3.5 across, and we've got 2 3/8 vertical, meaning that we've got an early 9-inch big bearing. If your vertical studs measure 2-inch up and down and 3 9/16 across horizontally, you have the late big bearing. If it's 2 3/8 inches vertical and 3.5-inch horizontal, like we have the early big bearing. Very important when you're figuring out what center housing you need. So pull that other axle out and pull the center section out, and there we go. Okay, so we've let this sit for a couple of weeks now with the penetrating fluid in there. And now the best thing I found to clean it, basically just spend time cleaning the surface off, everything. You want all this clean before you start. I would paint it, except I think the spring or the shock perches are in a different spot. One's on one side, one's on the other, whereas these have them both on the same side. So I need to put it in place and weld that on, and then I'll paint it. But you can paint the axle anytime. But to clean it, I found this worked pretty good. Just a wire brush that fits super tight inside the hole. The best way is it's just a 1/4 inch socket on a drill. You just spin it around, jam it in there, spin it both ways, and then that'll get the last of it out. There's a weld in here, and there's a detent here. So you can't use like a 3-jaw hone or anything to clean the inside. So wire wheel works good. I tried the flapper's too big, but we'll clean this side up, brake clean it all nice and clean, and then we can start assembly. Oh, one more thing to clean up. I'll hone it out, but I gotta get this race out. I left that in there just for you guys. Here we go. See that, but I am happy with that. That's nice and clean in there now, way better than it was. So to get the race out, we can use a puller to cut in behind there, and it looks like somebody's done that before. But if you take a welder and you just weld a bead in there, the weld will shrink and it'll pop right out. It's pretty neat. Don't need a big welder like that bottom one, little 110, and we'll do just fine. Put a rag in there just to keep all any slag or anything out. Look at that. You just flick it out by hand. No pullers or nothing necessary. Now, if you don't have a welder, go talk to your dad, or definitely your grandpa, because he's got one of those old Lincoln stick welders stuck in the corner of his garage somewhere. And you know what? You're gonna bring a tear to his eye when you say, Dad, Grandpa, can I borrow that stick welder? He's like, son, proud of you. Being a man, welding like a man, not like that girl DEBOSS who uses a MIG welder. Sad day. But anyway, you're more of a man than me. using that stick welder. You probably have a big beard like Vince. But anyway, we're gonna clean this out. Some brake clean in there, the last of the blowgun. We'll knock the studs out and then clean the mating surface, make sure that's nice and clean. Take the wire wheel again and hit it inside there, make sure that that's all good. And yeah, and that's just not rocket science. Make sure it's clean. And when you think it's clean, clean it again. By putting the nut on flush so it doesn't stick out in or out, and one good solid whack with a hammer, you can knock the studs out without wrecking the threads. Okay, so we're ready for our pumpkin. Now you can rebuild it. The issue is you're gonna kind of rebuild it with what you've got. We've got a, I'm not even sure what this gear ratio is, but it is an open center diff, meaning that we get stuck with one wheel peels. So we got a video coming up on the 55 where we rebuild one in California. But for this one, we are going with GearFX's complete unit. Now this is nice if you're worried at all about rebuilding it yourself, if you don't have the tools or the know-how, or you just want something with a warranty that you can just throw in and throw your axles in it and go down the road. This is a really good option by going with a GearFX unit. They've got 3 different kinds, an S, an N, and an HS. N is kind of their middle of the line, but it's kind of their flagship. It's good for pro touring, mild drag racing. 9-inch is the axle of choice, mainly because the way they have the ring and the pinion set up is that you get more tooth contact than a normal diff, say 10 bolt or 12 bolt out of a GM. Because of that, you'll see 9 inches in almost everything. Yeah, I've got a Dodge with a 9-inch, I've got a Chevy with a 9-inch, but that is the reason why. On top of that, you can take the axles out. If you grenade this on the drag strip or whatever, you can pull your axles, pull this out, clean your housing like we just did, and drop another one in there, and have one of these in the trailer ready to go, and you can go and make another pass. Basically, all we have to do, it took more work to clean the diff than it does to throw this in. So we'll throw a little bit of sealant on there, we'll drop this in, and then away we go. That is just sexy. Bam. If you want, you can also send them your 9-inch and they will put all the good parts in there, all the upgraded hardware, deburr everything, new bearings, set it all up for you, and they just send it back to you. So definitely check out everything that they're able to do for your build, especially if you have the time to wait while they do that. It's a really good option. And there we go. Okay, so we're ready to put our axles together and pop them in. Now your axle might look like this. It's got a locking collar, a bearing, a seal, and a plate, like a retaining plate to keep everything in from sliding out that way. Or it might look like this. It's got a brake backing plate for drum brakes, and then a bearing and a retaining collar, but you can see that collar is a lot smaller than this one. Our Timken set, which is a set 20 is the part number, SET20, comes with this thicker collar, so we're gonna go off of that. We're gonna measure this distance, which is about the thickness of a 1/2-inch washer, like a 1/2-inch bolt washer. But basically when you press it tight, it will go back in the same way. Now I was trying to figure out how to set the preload on a bearing, on a tapered bearing like this, with a race that you saw me weld out. You have to set the preload on. You can't have space in between for the wheel bearing to move, but you can't have it super tight so that they burn out. But the Timken set, it's a one-piece bearing, so you don't have to worry about that. You just have to press it in. Now, we won't be using this backing plate or this drum brake because we are using our Baer Brakes, and this kit replaces that. If you leave this in, your distance will be wrong between your rotor and your calipers. So keep that in mind. It's meant to go flush up against the axle housing itself. So take these apart. You do need to press to put them back together again. If you don't have one, go see a local shop. They'll be able to do it for you. Otherwise, go to Princess Auto. Presses aren't that expensive. And then you can do all your friends' 9-inch axles as well. But take your cut-off wheel, cut a slit in here, hit it with a cold chisel, snap it apart, break it, take the same grinder, cut your bearing apart, and then pop everything off. Clean the shaft, and you're good. This one, I might cut the drum off. We're done with this. Cut it here so it's not in my way, and then cut this collar, and same process. So we'll clean them up and put them back together. Here we go. Okay, so we've got our center section in. Time to get going on the brakes and the axle. So before I get into the axle, we've cleaned the bearings off, put it in a lathe with some emery cloth, clean up all the surfaces for our bearing and seal to go. We want to make sure that our rotor is the proper one. So one, that you got the proper bolt pattern. I knocked all the studs out and put some new studs on it. I just put it in the lathe and just spun it up and just ran some emery cloth on there, cleaned up that surface. And then because it was gouged or hit with a hammer and folded over that center lip, you want that to sit in there. So you want to make sure that that all fits. And we got a 5.5 bolt pattern, I think, 5 and 5.5 bolt pattern. So because the brakes are made for you, you can tell them whatever bolt pattern they want. So they did drill these in between other drills. Now that is a fairly large bolt pattern, so you can see that the holes were pretty far to the end, and then there's a little straight up and down lip on there, and then it starts to taper. So I did have to put it in the lathe and just put that little lip on there. You see it, just a tiny lip, and then the taper to make sure that the rotor does go flush right up against here. You don't want any vibration that way. So we got new studs. I can put the new studs in there, just dormant. So these are the studs that I'm using. And we want to prep this surface as well. So clean the inside of this. That's where the seal sits. And if you have the small bearing with the solid bearing, then there's a seal back here. You want to knock that seal out because the kit that we're using, the set 20, uses a gear oil to lubricate that bearing. So you got to get rid of that seal. It won't fit in anyway. Clean this surface off, make sure that it's nice and straight, that's not all bent and twisted, because what that does will throw the whole thing off, and then your brakes won't feel right, and they might vibrate, they might wear funny. So we want to start off with everything nice and straight and square and true as best as we can. So I'm going to knock the studs in there. That's just done with a hammer, or you can use a press, whatever you want. We're just using a hammer, lay it on a vise, open the jaws, stick the stud through and bang it through, and then we can pop it in and install the brakes. Here we go. So a good idea, I'm holding the camera, but it's a good idea to measure, center your axle and just measure the face from the back of the hub to the flange, and make sure that when everything is tight, that the distance is a little bit bigger. As you can hear now, when I put this in, that definitely hits something. So that's hitting the true track and bottoming out. So what we need is a space that's a little bit bigger, just to give us a little bit of free play, so it's not hitting or rubbing anything on the inside there. If it is, you can shave a little bit off of the end of the splines, and that shouldn't hurt anything. If you put the grease in the splines, then you know exactly where it stops. So you can see where the splines stop, just where that line is. So that was probably from the previous diff. So we have some splines to work with, so we can go in a little farther. If you put grease on here, stick it in and pull back out again, it'll give you a clear indication as to how many teeth you have left to work with. Okay, so our Timken set 20 kit, we got our seal, and that goes on first, all the way down, nice and evenly on there, beauty, not too far. Then we've got our bearing. Keep in mind that this lip, the seal goes over, so point that towards the lip. And then our locking collar, which will push on our bearing. So we can pop that on and then take it over to the press and press away. Okay, we'll pop the axle in. Not all the way. That'll help putting the seal in. You can measure now. Not all the way bottomed out, but you got a 1/4 inch to go. And that looks about right. So now we can get going on our brakes. This is the backing plate for the Baer Brakes, and you can see it just slides around, and that's actually what holds in your seal. So that's why you didn't replace that kit. So we gotta take the brakes off, pull this clip out. It pops right back in again afterwards, and that will really help in putting our brakes together on there, because we got to work it forward. Make sure you have the left and the right on the correct side, but pretty straightforward. Okay, so on the other brakes, I took this apart so I could slide this up much easier and finagled the brake lining around it, but these bolts are tight, so I think I probably did it wrong. I think if you tighten this flange down as you put the brakes in, that gives you more space, and then you're able to not touch any of this. We'll try that. Caliper to the back. E-brake at the bottom, stick it on, and well, that's 3/16. That's pretty tight, but it will work. So we'll tighten that down. Got some new nuts and bolts. So I thought I could slide this far enough forward that I could stick this in between, but I can't, because this plate will only ever be so far away because it hits the seal. And the seal is held in place by a big giant collar. So that means I'm going to take this parking brake assembly off and finagle it in between, like I did on the other one. Okay, so that's basically tapped in, and it's bouncing back, meaning that I'm hitting something, and I'm at 2 inches now. So I got a tiny gap there that I need to pull in, see that? And that's not gonna work. So I'm gonna pull this off and shave 3/8 of an inch off of the end of the splines. That will bottom that out nicely. Okay, so I've tried experimenting, putting the plate on a couple different ways. The easiest way is tricky because you gotta put the brake lining around the axle and then into these two slots. But this pin at the back makes it expand, has a pin in it, and you can't, it's really tricky to get this pin in there afterwards, but it makes it a lot easier if you take the bolts out and stick that in the brake drum. But it's not worth it because you can't get that pin in there because that little pin flops around. I kept all the bolts out of the backing plate, and then I removed both pieces of the parking brake mechanism. Then you can just tap the brake band around it. Now with this underneath, you can pop your slides back in there again, the adjusters, and then pop your brake band up. But I think if I was to put the studs in afterwards through the slot right here, then I would be able to fit the brake band in much easier. So I take this back, maybe do your studs afterwards and use a puller or a press just in a socket and squeeze them together, squeeze them through. That would have given me that extra little bit of room to make that a lot easier. But that's why I do this, for you guys. So now you guys know you don't have to spend an hour doing this. Here we go. There, bolt everything together and pop your rotor on. Okay, all the bolts are tight and it spins so nice. Brake rotor on. Sure that bottoms out. E-brake works, it's adjusted okay. The only problem with that adjuster is you can't really get at it without taking the brakes apart. And then the tighter you make it, the harder it is to put together. But about halfway through, she locks up. So I'm okay with that. All right, so we'll put the calipers on and then we are just about there. One of the nicest things I love about Baer is that they got like 30 different colors to choose from. So this is a pretty close match to some of the colors on the Bronco. So we'll bolt that in place, but when you bolt it, you got to measure all the four corners from your rotor. Once your rotor is bolted down so that it's perfectly straight, and then you want to shim in between this bracket and the mounting bracket and make sure that the caliper is spaced equally on either side of the rotor and not tilted any funny way. So it comes with shims in the package. The issue is that all my studs are with the Bronco and the Bronco isn't paint. But we'll put this together just because I want to see it kind of finished, and then the Bronco will be back from paint in a week or two. But once you got the distance from here to here and here to here equal on the top and the bottom, you are good to go. And that is a good looking axle that will move and stop and park your ride. Okay, so the only thing left to do now that we've got the whole thing assembled is to add oil. So we're gonna throw some Pennzoil in there. We've been running Pennzoil in the Audi diff and the transmission, and they've held together great. So this actually has the additive for the limited slip already. Now this is a true track, so it doesn't need it, but it doesn't hurt it if you do throw it in. There's not a whole lot of oil that goes in there, so you got to make sure it's good stuff, because if it leaks, you're in trouble. Better start with some good stuff. Okay, so if you are new to the channel and you wanted to see how we put this axle together, again, we do have a full rebuild video on the struggles of you doing it in a driveway, because I did it in a driveway on the other side of the continent without the proper tools, and it's definitely possible, but this is just so much quicker and easier and stress-free. This is going in our Coyote Swap Bronco. You'll see this going into the Bronco next. We're picking it up from paint tomorrow. We have to assemble it. We got about a month before it's got to be at a show. So we're very excited. So thanks for watching, guys. Remember, if you're not filthy, you're not rich, and get out there and work on it, because nobody else is going to. It's well worth it. Here we go.